The Ride of a Lifetime by Robert Iger. Lessons learned from 15 years as CEO of the Walt Disney Company. Robert Iger became CEO of the Walt Disney Company in 2005 during a difficult time. Competition was more intense than ever, and technology was changing faster than at any time in the company's history. Iger knew there was nothing to be gained from arguing over the past. The only thing that mattered was the future, and he believed he had a clear idea of the direction Disney needed to go. His vision came down to 3 clear ideas: recommit to the concept that quality matters, embrace technology instead of fighting it, and think bigger, think globally, and turn Disney into a stronger brand in international markets. 14 years later, Disney is the largest, most respected media company in the world, counting Pixar, Marvel, Lucasfilm, and 21st Century Fox among its properties. Its value is nearly 5 times what it was when Iger took over, and he is recognized as one of the most innovative and successful CEOs of our era. Chapter 1. Starting at the bottom. This book is not a memoir, but it's impossible to talk about the traits that have served me well over the course of my professional life and not look back at my childhood. There are certain ways I've always been, things I've always done, that are the result of some inscrutable mix of nature and nurture. I've always woken up early, for example, as far back as I can remember, and cherished those hours to myself before the rest of the world wakes up. There are other qualities and habits that are the result of purposeful decisions I made along the path. As is the case with many of us, those decisions were partially made in response to my parents, in particular my father, a brilliant and complicated man who shaped me more than anyone. He certainly made me curious about the world. We had a den lined with shelves full of books, and my dad had read every one of them. I didn't become a serious reader until I was in high school, but when I did finally fall in love with books, it was because of him. Chapter 2. Betting on Talent. In March 1985, I was 34 years old and had just been made vice president of ABC Sports when Leonard Goldenson, ABC's founder, chairman, and CEO, agreed to sell the corporation to a much smaller company, Capital Cities Communications. Capital Cities, as they were called, was a quarter the size of ABC, and they bought us for $3.5 billion. Everyone at ABC was blindsided by the announcement. How could a company like Cap City suddenly own a major television network? Who were these guys? How did this happen? These guys were Tom Murphy and Dan Burke. Over the years, they built Cap Cities, starting a small television station in Albany, New York, acquisition by acquisition. With help from Tom's close friend Warren Buffett, who backed the $3.5 billion deal, they were able to swallow our much larger company. As Tom Murphy put it, they were the minnow that ate the whale. Chapter 3. Know what you don't know and trust in what you do. It wasn't quite leaping without a parachute, but it felt a lot like free fall at first. I told myself, you have a job. They're expecting you to turn this business around. Your inexperience can't be an excuse for failure. So what do you do in a situation like that? The first rule is not to fake anything. You have to be humble, and you can't pretend to be someone you're not or to know something you don't. You're also in a position of leadership though, so you can't let humility prevent you from leading. It's a fine line and something I preach today. You have to ask the questions you need to ask, admit without apology what you don't understand, and do the work to learn what you need to learn as quickly as you can. There's nothing less confidence inspiring than a person faking a knowledge they don't possess. True authority and true leadership come from knowing who you are and not pretending to be anything else. Chapter 4. Enter Disney. So much has been said and written about Disney's acquisition of us that I have little to add, except from my own unique perspective, given my position at ABC and the fact that I was told at the time that it was of critical importance to Michael Eisner that I sign a 5-year contract to remain with the combined company. Michael had been Disney's CEO since 1984, and he'd been running the company without a number 2 for more than a year. After his COO Frank Wells died in a helicopter crash in the spring of 1994. If this deal went through, Disney would nearly double in size, and Michael knew he couldn't integrate the two companies and run the newly combined entity on his own. It was a lot for me to absorb. One day, I was in line to become the next CEO of Cap Cities, ABC. The next, I was being asked to run the media division of Disney for at least 5 years. While the latter was an intriguing job, objectively, it felt at the time like a bitter pill to swallow. Chapter 5, Second in Line. For the next 3 years, Michael ran the company without a number 2. Our relationship grew closer in the wake of Ovid's leaving. But I also sensed from time to time a wariness on Michael's part, that he felt I had an eye on his job and could never fully trust me. It resulted in a kind of ongoing approach and avoidance. Michael would bring me in on decisions at times and confide in me, and then suddenly he would go cold and keep me at arm's length. It was true that I'd stayed on after the acquisition in part because I thought I might have a shot at running the company one day. But that didn't mean I was angling for Michael's job. It meant I was committed to doing my own job as best I could, and to learning as much as I could about all aspects of the company. As had been going the case throughout my career, if the time came when Michael was ready to step down, I wanted to be ready when the opportunity arose. Chapter 6. Good things can happen. I've often said that Michael refounded Walt's company when he took over Disney in 1984. Its glory days were a distant memory. The company had been struggling since Walt died in 1966. Walt Disney Studios and animation were in terrible shape. Disneyland and Walt Disney World were still popular, but they were also responsible for nearly 3/4 of the company's income. In the last 2 years before Michael came on, Disney's net income fell by 25%. In 1983, the corporate raider Sal Steinberg tried to take Disney over, the latest in a series of takeover attempts that the company barely survived. The next year, Roy Disney, Walt's nephew, and Sid Bass, Disney's largest shareholder, brought in Michael as CEO and chairman and Frank Wells as president to reverse the company's fortunes and maintain its independence. Michael had been running Paramount, and Frank was the former chief of Warner Brothers. They then hired Jeffrey Katzenberg, who'd worked under Michael at Paramount, to run Disney Studios. Chapter 7. It's about the future. The challenge for me was, how do I convince the Disney board that I was the change they were looking for without criticizing Michael in the process? There had been some decisions I disagreed with, and I thought that the company was in need of change given all the noise, but I respected Michael and was grateful for the opportunities he'd given me. I'd also been COO of the company for 5 years, and it would have been hypocritical, transparently so, to lay all of the blame on someone else. Mostly, though, it just wouldn't have been right to make myself look better at Michael's expense. I vowed to myself not to do that. I spent a few days after the announcement trying to figure out a way to thread the particular needle, how to talk about the past without implicating myself too much in decisions that weren't mine, or swinging too far for the other way and joining in a pile-on of Michael. The solution to that predicament came from an unexpected place. A week or so after the board's announcement, I received a phone call from a highly regarded political consultant and brand manager named Scott Miller. Chapter 8. The Power of Respect. There was a 6-month waiting period between my appointment and Michael's exit from Disney. I had plenty to focus on running the company day to day, but I was looking forward to taking a breather and spending some time gathering my thoughts after the long succession process. I figured the clock on my first 100 days would start when Michael walked out the door, and until then I could fly somewhat under the radar and be patient and methodical in my plans. I couldn't have been more wrong. Immediately after the announcement, everyone, the press, the investment community, the rest of the industry, Disney employees, was asking the same thing. What's your strategy for fixing the company and how fast can you implement it? Because of its history and because Michael has so dramatically transformed it, Disney has always been one of the most scrutinized corporations in the world. The very public struggles we'd endured over the last few years only increased intrigue around who I was and what I was going to do. Chapter 9. Disney Pixar and a new path to the future. Those months spent talking with Steve about putting our TV show on his new iPod began, slowly, to open up into discussions of a possible new Disney Pixar deal. Steve had softened, but only a little. He was willing to talk, but his version of any new agreement was still very one-sided in Pixar's favor. We parried a few times over what a deal might look like, but we got nowhere. I asked Tom Staggs to join the discussions and see if he could make progress. We also brought in a go-between from Gene Sykes, whom we trusted and who knew Steve well. We floated a few different ideas to Steve through Gene, but Steve still didn't budge. His resistance wasn't complicated. Steve loved Pixar, and he didn't care about Disney, so any agreement he deemed to consider would have huge upsides for them and come at a steep price for us. One proposal had us ceding to Pixar the valuable sequel rights to the films we'd already released together, like Toy Story, Monsters, Inc., and The Incredibles, in exchange for a 10% stake in their company. Chapter 10: Marvel and Massive Risks That Make Perfect Sense. The Pixar acquisition served our urgent need to revitalize Disney animation, but it was also the first step in our larger growth strategy to increase the amount of high-quality branded content we created, to advance technologically, both in our ability to create more compelling products and to deliver those products to consumers, and to grow globally. Tom Staggs, Kevin Meyer, and I had a list of acquisition targets that we believed could help us fulfill those priorities, and we decided to focus first on intellectual property. Who possessed great IP that could have applications across the full range of our businesses? Two companies came immediately to mind: Marvel Entertainment and Lucasfilm. We had no idea if either might be for sale, but for a variety of reasons, among them that I believed it would be very hard to convince George Lucas to sell the company he built himself and relinquish control of the Star Wars legacy. We put Marvel at the top of our list. I wasn't steeped in Marvel lore, but you didn't have to be a lifelong reader of the comics to know it was a trove of compelling characters and stories that would plug easily into our movie, television, theme park, and consumer products businesses. Chapter 11: Star Wars. I would have liked for Steve to have seen what our investment in Marvel turned into. He probably would have never cared much for the movies, although I think he would have appreciated how Black Panther and Captain Marvel flew in the face of industry shibboleths. But he would have been proud that he'd been instrumental in bringing Ike around, and that the brand had flourished so much under Disney. With every success the company has had since Steve's death, there's always a moment in the midst of my excitement when I think, I wish Steve would be here for this. It's impossible not to have the conversation with him in my head that I wish I would be having in real life. In the summer of 2011, Steve and his wife Lauren came to our house in LA to have dinner with Willow and me. He was in the late stages of cancer by then, terribly thin and in obvious pain. He had very little energy and his voice was a low rasp. But he wanted to spend an evening with us, in part to toast what we've done years ago. Chapter 12: If you don't innovate, you die. After the dust settled on the last of our big three acquisitions, we began to focus even more on the dramatic changes we were experiencing in our media businesses and the profound disruption we were feeling. The future of those businesses had begun to seriously worry us, and we concluded it was time for us to start delivering our content in new and modern ways, and to do so without intermediaries, on our own technology platform. The question for us were, could we find the technology we needed to accomplish that and be at the forefront of change rather than simply being undone by it? Did we have the stomach to start cannibalizing our own still profitable businesses in order to begin building a new model? Could we disrupt ourselves, and would Wall Street tolerate the losses that we would inevitably incur as we tried to truly modernize and transform the company? We had to do it. I was sure of that. It was the old lesson all over again, and the need to constantly innovate. So the next question was, do we build a tech platform or do we buy one? Chapter 13: No Price on Integrity. Rupert's decision to sell was a direct response to the same forces that led us to create an entirely new strategy for our company. As he pondered the future of his company in such a disrupted world, he concluded the smartest thing to do was to sell and give his shareholders and his family a chance to convert his 21st Century Fox stock into Disney stock, believing we were better positioned to withstand a change and, combined, we'd be even stronger. It's hard to overstate how sweeping the disruption is in our industry, but his decision to break up a company he built from almost nothing was as good a maker as any of its inevitability. Just as Rupert and I were entering the beginning phase of what will become an almost 2-year journey to close a massive deal that would alter the media landscape, a transformative social change was also underway, one more profound than the mega technology changes we were experiencing. Chapter 14, Core Values. On June 12, 2018, a district court judge in Lower Manhattan ruled in favor of AT&T buying Time Warner. The next day, Brian Roberts announced Comcast's new offer, an all-cash bid of $35 per share, $64 billion, to our $28 per share. Not only was the number significantly higher, but the all-cash offer would be attractive to many shareholders who would rather have cash than stock. Suddenly, we were in danger of losing the deal that we'd been dreaming about and working so hard on for the past 6 months. The Fox board had scheduled a meeting to take place a week later in London, during which they would vote on the Comcast offer. We could bid again, and we needed to decide quickly on what our number would be. We could raise our bid but still come in slightly under theirs and hope that their board would continue to believe that the path to regulatory approval, despite the AT&T decision, was still easier with us. We could match Comcast's offer and hope that they wouldn't scuttle our deal for an equivalent offer, even if many investors would prefer cash over stock. Thank you for listening.